We had some really good discussion this morning, and which it's just stimulate my thoughts and hopefully everybody else to have a little bit of a discussion, not only about what we heard, but how we incorporate this into our thinking about the future. So for that, I'd like to invite 5 highly distinguished participants in a discussion now. Present with us here, Dr. Strauss and Dr. Schisterman, and also online, hopefully they're going to join us. I hope to see all 3, Dr. Adashi, Dr. Lewis, and Dr. Phipps. I can see them here, but I hope we see them. Hello, hi Ellie, hi Judette, and hi Maureen. Now we see you all. Now everybody sees you as well. I don't know if you see us, but we all see you as well, so thank you very much. And I just first want to introduce our panel, and I want, as you listen to our panel expertise, I think it will stimulate a lot of interest in asking them really penetrating questions. So I'm going to start first with Dr. Adashi, who is online with us. Dr. Adashi is a professor of medical science and former dean of medicine and biological sciences at Brown University. Dr. Adashi is also former president of the Society for Reproductive Endocrinologists, the SGI, Society for Gynecological Investigation, now called SRI, and also the American Gynecological and Obstetrical Society, what's called AGOS. Judette Luis, Judette, you were with us yesterday in one of the breakout. Thanks a lot for joining again. Judette is the chair of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of South Florida, and also former president of the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine. Also online with us, thanks Maureen for joining again, Dr. Phipps is the Chief Executive Officer of the American College of OBGYN, also a Professor Emeritus of OBGYN at the Warren Alpert Medical School, also at Brown University with Dr. Adashi. Dr. Phipps is also the past president of AGOS, as I presented just a minute ago. We have 2 participants here in person. Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Strauss is an emeritus professor of OBGYN at the Perelman School of Medicine, University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Strauss is also the former executive vice president for medical affairs and dean of Virginia Commonwealth University. And lastly, but definitely not least, Enrique Schisterman. Enrique is now the chair of the Department of Biostatistics and Epidemiology and Informatics at the University of Pennsylvania. And many of you may know Enrique from the time he was at the NIH. He's the past director of the Division of Population Health Sciences at NICHD. So I really thank all of us for joining here today. And I'm going to let each of our panelists at a time make just really a brief comment about your interests. But as you do that, I'm going to ask you not only to introduce your current interests, but also your view about what are going to be the most pertinent questions in women's health and reproductive sciences in the next 5 to 10 years. And I know you may want to think about it for a minute, but I think this is something that all of us in the audience, and I know all 5 of you are thinking about a lot. So maybe I'm going to start with Dr. Strauss, if that's okay, and then hopefully everybody can join in. So please, Jerry, start with a word about your work and also what do you think are going to be the most pertinent issues in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Yoel, and my congratulations for a very successful second summit to you and your colleagues. It's really been a wonderful smorgasbord of incredible science and opportunity. I'm a physician basic scientist, and my research is focused primarily on the molecular and cellular basis of dysfunction of the endocrine system with respect to fertility, primarily polycystic ovary syndrome, but also more recently pregnancy complications, because our assisted reproductive technologies unfortunately created many more pregnancy complications than we had hoped for, despite the fact we were thrilled with the success of that treatment for infertility. So I've been interested in both preterm birth and preeclampsia. I'd like to comment not so much on areas of science that I think are going to be important in the future, because I think you've done a wonderful job, Yoel, in covering them in the presentations that we've heard over the last 2 days. but more importantly about the workforce, the pipeline that is ultimately going to carry out the studies that have been initiated through our colleagues that we heard about today and move them forward so that they can actually have an impact on women's health in a very diverse spectrum of health issues. And that concerns me very much now that I approach my philosophause that we heard yesterday, and thinking about how we're going to prepare that workforce to both deliver the clinical care in the trenches, but also to do the science that's necessary in multidisciplinary ways that can really address the diversity of problems in women's health. And during my career, I've had the opportunity to be involved in a variety of training programs for both graduate students. I ran a graduate program at Penn. I was the director of the MD PhD program for a number of years, and then in my role as a dean and a health system CEO, very concerned about both medical education and graduate medical education. I think in obstetrics and gynecology in particular, we have to be concerned about that basic science workforce and building it so that it can sustain the momentum of the science that we've had over the past few years, past several decades. When you look at the outcomes of MD PhD programs, you see that only about 1.5% of graduates go into obstetrics and gynecology. I'm not sure exactly what the reasons are. It's unfortunate and disappointing because that was the path that I chose, but I'm wondering why in our wonderful field with such important problems to address that we're not attracting more of those physician scientists who could make significant contributions. I think that that's something we need to think about in terms of how we train medical students who want to be physician scientists, how they make decisions about their career options as they select a residency program, and why is it that so few of them have decided to go into areas of reproduction where there's such great need for both basic science and translational science. And that's a big issue that I think we should think about. One of the issues may be the opportunity to do research during postgraduate medical education. An MD PhD program director called me up a few weeks ago and said, can you tell me which residencies in OBGYN are research intensive? And I said, I don't know any. And you know, that sort of made his jaw drop. And he said, well, is it because it's a surgical specialty? Look at the number of MD, PhD graduates who go into surgical specialties. It's many more fold times the 1.5% that go into obstetrics and gynecology. So I think as a field, and particularly as a specialty in obstetrics and gynecology, we need to do some serious thinking about what we're doing for the pipeline for the basic sciences, because those are the sciences that are going to drive the future clinical diagnostic tools and therapeutic interventions that we need to address these serious problems that we've heard about today.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Really important comments. I'm going to go to our online Judette Luis. Thanks a lot for joining us. What do you think about that question? Maybe, Judette, you can introduce your work, but also about the challenges you see in the field of reproductive sciences, women's health in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you for that. First of all, this summit has been really inspiring and really highlights some of the progress that we've made. I think there are two crucial areas. I primarily work in maternal morbidity, and specifically I look at the impacts on both maternal and fetal health in the short term and long term. And as I see what we've said over the past couple of days, there's been a recurring theme of, oh, we were wrong. And I think that's so important, that humility when we're approaching science and recognizing that going from bench to bedside, so often the message of us being wrong in science came from the patients. And so I think it's important to continue that connection and to listen to the voices of the patients as we try to figure out the right interventions or even the mechanistic pathways that leads to disease, or what we're trying to do is to lead to wellness. And I think that is important. The second piece, I was struck by, first of all, my increasing interest in the reversal of aging. That's funny. Every year I get more and more interested in it. Maybe I'll learn something. But I love that we are recognizing that we need personalized solutions and personalized medicine. We just need to find a way to do that so that portions of our population are not left behind, that there are portions of our population who currently don't have basic needs. And so how do we continue to move forward in that science and understand that there needs to be a way for it to be accessible to all? Thank you.
Excellent comments, and I'm sure, Judith, you heard the presentation. Yesterday we had some discussion about longevity and new approaches to longevity, and also your comments dovetail exactly what Dr. Hilliard was talking about just in the last session, about the need to communicate, to engage patients in everything we do. As we said yesterday, we need to remove any barriers, tear down any walls, separate the laboratories from our communities. So thank you very much for your comments. I'm going to turn now to our present here, Dr. Schisterman. You're the only non-OBGYN, the only non-MD person on the panel, but you've deeply engaged in the topic. Maybe you want to say one word about what you've done and your thoughts about the 5 to 10 years.
Sure. So thank you again. Sorry. Thank you again for the invitation. This is really inspiring. It makes me think that I always made the right choice to pick this path here in these talks. I do epidemiological research on preconception and conception and post-conception and randomized clinical trials. And I won't cover the educational piece because I think that Jerry covered that well, but I think that one of the things I'm most passionate about is that we are at the cusp of a revolution on our understanding of observational data and how to be used in clinical settings. There is new discoveries today that introduce this idea of trial emulations, meaning with observational studies, we can emulate trials to answer many of the questions that we are faced in our practice. And so with the incorporation of informatics, asking the right questions in epidemiology and clinicians, and utilizing the biostatistical tools, I think I'm really happy to be at this point where we're going to be answering questions that we couldn't answer before. So that's what my positive outlook for the future.
Thank you very much for this. And I'm going to ask Maureen, you have participated in our session yesterday at lunchtime. And so we know a little bit about what you do, but maybe just remind us, but also in your influential job at ACOG, where you can actually not only think about the next 5 to 10 years, but also think about how to address those issues. What do you think about this question?
Well, thank you so much, Bill. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this whole meeting and this incredible panel. It's truly been an inspiring meeting, and hearing from the panelists already has, gotten lots of things in my mind thinking. And I truly appreciate the workforce pieces, the inclusion of our patients and our communities, such an important piece. And I feel like some of what has come across in both this question, but also in the entire summit, has been this emphasis on collaboration while driving innovation. And the programs emphasized all phases of translational science, basic science, bench to bedside to community, which is incredibly inspiring and important at this moment in time. You know, incorporating the meaningful partnerships, collaboration, and feedback at all stages of the development of science is fundamental to meaningful innovation. And to Dr. Lewis's point about being inclusive of our patients and the community members who will be impacted, ensuring that we have feedback, it will help us. It'll challenge us. It'll give us new perspectives, but it is what will make the difference. So I really think it's important as we look to that lens. And I really see it that there's so much opportunity as we strive to provide new tools and techniques, as was mentioned, for our healthcare professionals, including OBGYNs, and also as we strive to improve the care we deliver to patients and the lives of people who live in a diverse range of communities that we serve professionally and personally. And I feel like as we're inspired by developing new technology and leveraging existing data, our resources, the partnerships, we also need to remember our goals, our mission, our values, and ultimately, Yoel, as you say a lot, the humanity and the human component. And, you know, we are in challenging times. We have opportunities to learn from the challenges we face. We've spoken about the pandemic several times during this summit. And so including the challenges that the physicians and all healthcare professionals have faced, who have been on the forefront, who have been at the front lines caring for patients, and also advocating for their patients and their colleagues for technology, for access to tools. It's, you know, also time for us to acknowledge that our colleagues are suffering. I heard that in this session as well, that our colleagues are suffering from exhaustion to the point of burnout and experiencing trauma from the continued stress of the pandemic. So as we move forward with innovation, we definitely need to keep this very human component in mind as well and respect it as we recognize the strain and uncertainty of the time we're living in. And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that we need to acknowledge these are incredibly challenging times facing women and physicians and all healthcare professionals who are caring for them. Much is at stake at this moment in time. There are tremendous pressures and efforts to undermine women's health, including stripping away constitutional rights. So we need to recognize that and acknowledge it as we innovate and bring new technologies and treatments to bear. We also need to recognize we're in this point that's also been mentioned, is that we have a deficit of trust. There are many aspects of our patient communities that are not trusting us as healthcare professionals, aren't trusting the science. We need to pay attention to that as we rebuild. And as Dr. Lewis also mentioned, there are still substantial inequities in access and in care delivery and significant disparities in outcomes. So keeping patients at the center of our work, asking ourselves why we are innovating or why we are pursuing research in a certain way, why it matters, who benefits, who doesn't, will help us keep grounded in our creative work as we focus on meaningful solutions. So as we move forward with these innovations that have the potential for such significant impact, it's essential that we keep this bigger view in mind and think about the complexities of the times we're living in and then push ourselves, just as this summit did. This summit has been an incredible example of engaging in ways that build the spirit of collaboration across disciplines within disciplines and take that big picture into consideration and drive us to think about how we can have the most impact and make the biggest difference. So thank you, Yoel, for letting me say that piece.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and you're really in a position to have this broad view that, so your comments, I think, are really are going to be inspiring to many, not only those attending here, but hopefully we can broadcast it broadly to many others. Dr. Adachi, Ellie, we gave you the most time to come up with the wisest answer. So what is your, how would you like maybe perhaps say one word about your current work, which I read about a lot, and also about your thoughts for the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, thank you, Yoel. A lot has already been said, and I thought very eloquently too. And so I will have to pick and choose here and hopefully be contributory still. In terms of what I try to focus on these days, I would put at the top of the list what I would define as emerging technologies. And most of those, of course, are in my special area of interest, namely reproductive endocrinology or assisted reproduction, wherein I see truly eye-popping possibilities coming down the pike. Some of them, perhaps even in my lifetime. I notice I may be the oldest member of this group. And so I tend to be quite excited about novel approaches to reproduction that obviously don't address the nitty-gritty issues that Maureen appropriately raised, including the constitutional right to abortion, person power issues, and the like. And so I sometimes think of my interest in emerging technologies as an indulgence in the sense that it obviously looks at the future and does not specifically address itself to the day-to-day challenges that perhaps are, in terms of the order of priorities, should come first. I'm also following what's happening nationally in terms of our health policy, and we often write about that. There's a lot going on. We obviously won't be able to cover that. We have an ongoing interest in bioethics, and to some extent in the law and how it impacts our lives as physicians and scientists. I want to bring some of this back, though, to what my friend and mentor, Jerry Strauss, said at the beginning. I, too, although it's been a while ago, was a physician scientist. I haven't done that since 2004, but for about 25 years, that's what I did. NIH-supported lab work for a long, long time, in which context Jerry was very important. He and I interacted at that level, and I owe him a great deal in terms of his mentoring and support during that period. But what I come back to today, in keeping with what he said, is the all-important role of science in almost anything we do. And if we needed any illustration of that, I think we all recognize the remarkable accomplishment of the mRNA vaccines that may have not eliminated the COVID-19 epidemic, an interesting topic to discuss, whether it will be eliminated. But it made a huge difference, of course, and allowed those of us who are fully vaccinated to at least be protected to a large degree. There are downsides to that immunization process, of course, because we are still subject to breakthrough infections, and we are all potential spreaders, even if we're asymptomatic. And so there are other issues to discuss on that, but what I'm trying to say is that science is all important. And yes, we have seen a slippage. education, science pursuits, and just overall the academic emphasis that perhaps I recall growing up with. I sometimes refer to the giants in whose shadow we grew up, who are now gone. And my feeling sometimes is that my younger colleagues don't even recognize those names. Mention was made of the delay of aging, which I am very sympathetic to. And I would argue yet again that here again, science is everything. Aging is in the final analysis a biologic question. I believe, not in my lifetime, but I believe that the dilemma of aging will be addressed one day by science. It might even lead to a relative or a modicum of immortality, which we can debate the wisdom thereof. But I do think that ultimately everything is resolvable, addressable, solvable through science. I don't mean by that social issues, but the challenges of health, whatever they may be, ultimately can be addressed this way. Some faster, some not so fast. So to bring this full circle, Yoel, to where we started with Jerry, I would like to re-emphasize how important it would be for our discipline to re-embrace science, to re-embrace academic values. And I would have to admit that in my discipline of reproductive endocrinology, the slippage has been quite substantial. And I'd like us to very much see some pushback in the reverse direction so that we can continue to capitalize on the powers of science and continue to advance our discipline through that mechanism. Well, I've probably exceeded my welcome long ago, which would prompt me to stop at this point. Thank you, Yoel, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Eli, for your very wise comments, and clearly all of your experience assist in us understanding the perspective of where you're coming from and hopefully where we're going. So my next question is going to be, as I hope some of our audience also going to join in questions, this is really a uniquely brilliant team here with us, so an opportunity for all of us to challenge them. I'm going to try to challenge Enrique Schisterman with something really emanates from all of your comments. We talked about the need for training and to reestablishing science. Jerry, you started with this, and Eli, you just ended with this. But all of us also talked about the need to incorporate two additional themes here. One of them is reach out to communities, engaging patients, being more humane, as you said, Maureen, being more humane about what we do, which requires certain skills among our future trainees. Another theme we all introduced throughout this meeting also is something a bit maybe colder, if I may use this word. Data scientists, machine learning, artificial intelligence. How do we train the next generation in marrying these two into becoming better physician scientists? How do we marry, and Enrique, I want to start with you because you're actually doing it. As an epidemiologist dealing with data sciences, how do you marry these two to get the right people to be attracted to our field and to educate them to face future challenges? Enrique.
Well, that's a wonderful question. There are many aspects to this, and I will focus only on two. Number one is that we are more holistic, and then now more than ever, you need team science because you need different perspectives from different people, from different disciplines, from different life experiences to answer questions. So every scientist is a data scientist. Not every data scientist is a scientist, but that's another discussion for a different day. The other piece here is that the role of scientists and data scientists, and we're all data scientists in some way, is to continue to ask the right questions. And so by integrating the teams, we can use different tools. But the most important part of it is what's the right question? What are we trying to answer? And the rest is just tools to get there. I think it's very easy today to integrate a curriculum that includes machine learning and all these beautiful terms. If nothing else, you can, an aside is that we got to give credit for the informatics people that are geniuses in branding. I mean, data science, machine learning is the name itself is genius. But I think it's the progression of all these disciplines together, and there is no one field more than another. We need to integrate the clinicians into the data science world. It's not more complicated than anything else. We have done this before, and I'm excited that we can continue to do that.
Thank you very much, Enrique. They are great comments. I don't want to pick up on anybody else from the panel, but if anybody wants to comment on my question about how to integrate our humane side of our activities as physician scientists and also the colder data sciences and machine learning, just the word itself, is almost in contrast to our humane approach to communities. Anybody wants to comment on that, please raise your hand. So maybe Maureen and then Judith. Maureen, please.
Yeah, thank you. Those comments were just right on. I just want to, my comments pretty brief, but team science is absolutely so critical, as are asking the right questions. I also think the team does need to include the communities impacted. Otherwise, it may be empty. So we may not be able to implement, and so I just think we need to learn from the implementation scientists as well. So that just to add on to that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Lewis.
I think in clinical medicine, there sometimes is a great divide when you're talking about machine learning. And we very much value ourselves as clinicians and our decision making and the notion that we can't be replaced. And so I think in order to make progress, there have to be some robust conversations around it and really changing the mentality so that we can realize the potential gains from machine learning and the ways that it can improve what we do bedside. And so I don't think there have been enough of those conversations. And so I do still see a lot of conflict when you talk about machine learning and how it can advance what we do scientifically and also clinically.
I appreciate your thoughts on this very much. And I know, Judith, you think about these things a lot. So especially in your environment in Florida, the department you oversee, these things are going to be critical for sure. So thank you. I'm going to try to have two more questions. I'll just, we have a question from virtual, but maybe Dr. Janowitz first.
Thank you. Just first a quick point. I think perhaps one way to think about the marriage would be the term personalized medicine, which does in some way bridge that. But if we can bring the person back in the personalized part of medicine, because there's a huge, obviously, machine learning component to that. My question is really, I'd like to hear the panel's thoughts on science education. We heard particularly last night at the dinner about changing the way we communicate with people. And from the perspective of where you sit, what do you think is the major barrier? And any thoughts about the best way we can reach out to different populations?
So maybe I'm going to ask Jerry, Dr. Strauss, please, to comment on that, if you may.
An incredibly important question. It's not only science education for the lay community, it's science education for the professional community at all levels. I was struck when Roberto Romero was talking yesterday, noting that we used to treat preterm labor with intravenous ethanol. And I can remember doing that and asking myself, while these women were nauseated, vomiting, totally incapacitated, why are we doing this? What is the science behind it? Yes, I know it suppresses oxytocin production from the pituitary gland, but is this really medically necessary, and has this been evaluated through clinical trials? As a House officer, I didn't have time to read all of that. I was just following what the protocols were. So educating our frontline providers about high quality science and evaluation of information is critical. And then having those individuals be prepared to transmit that information to the individuals that they care for in a culturally sensitive way, in a way that is clearly understandable for people whose science education expertise may span the gambit from being true professionals to being complete novices. And that's something that communication skills, we just assume that people take it in by osmosis. It's part of the unwritten curriculum, but something that perhaps the standardized patient in innovation in medical education will help us address in the future.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I have to admit, I had to show by example as the meeting organizer and make sure we end on time. There were two questions virtual, and I just want to acknowledge and thank the people who asked the question, Lakshmi Bakshi from New York and Jim Roberts here from Pittsburgh. They had great comments and questions, but we're really out of time. We have to pick lunch and be ready for our 12 o'clock session. So I just want to thank Dr. Adashi, Eli. Thank you very, very much for your comments. I wish you could join us, Judette, here from Florida. I hope you have great weather today. And I thank you very much for participation throughout the conference. Same with you, Maureen. This has been terrific to have you, especially with your position. You really can influence and implement many of your recommendations. Jerry, Enrique, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate your comments and you being here.